Chapter 1. They came out of the trees on both sides at the same time. She had her compass in one hand and a measuring chain in the other. She didn't drop either of them. 2 men. Big. Moving fast through the snow without making much noise, which told her something about what they were before they said a word. They had her surrounded before she could take a full breath. One at her left shoulder, one directly ahead, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at his face. "Drop the pack." She set the compass down in the snow, carefully, then the chain. Then she straightened up and put her hands where they could see them. "My name is Elara. I'm a cartographer with the Eldenmore Order. I'm not armed." The one in front of her didn't move. He looked at her the way you look at something you haven't decided what to do with yet. "You crossed the boundary?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I know." They went through her pack right there in the snow, pulled out the map case, checked each roll, looked at the compass and the sealed ink vials, put it all back, handed the case to her. "No blades," he said to the other one. "Just paper." She slung the case back over her shoulder. Then they walked her in. 3 miles through forest in the dark with her hands free and the map case on her back, which told her they weren't afraid of her. That was useful. The men on either side moved like the territory was theirs, not in any way that had to do with maps or fences, but like they had grown up inside it, like the ground knew their weight. She memorized the route as she walked. Couldn't help it. 30 degrees east of north at the tree line, stream crossing at the low point, frozen solid, 6 paces wide, gradual rise for the first mile, then steeper. Old trees giving way to younger ones at the half-mile mark. That was where she heard it, one sentinel to the other. Low, conversational, the way you state a fact you have stated many times before. 11 crossed, none returned. She kept walking. She kept her breathing even and her pace steady, and she did not look at either of them. She just let the number settle into her, the way cold settles. Slowly, completely, finding every gap. 11, she would be the 12th. She was still building the map in her head when the stronghold came into view. Old stone. The kind that stops looking built and starts looking grown. Torchlight in the windows. A gate that opened without anyone knocking. They brought her inside. The great hall was warm and large. High ceiling, long fireplace, stone floor worn smooth by centuries. She counted the exits without meaning to. 1 main door behind her. 2 smaller ones on the left. A staircase at the far right. Then she saw him, and she stopped counting exits. He was standing at the far end of the hall. Not on a platform, not behind a table, just standing, in the open, watching her cross toward him. Tall, dark clothing, no armor, no weapons she could see. He looked like a man who hadn't needed weapons in a long time. The sentinels stopped her at a distance she guessed he had chosen himself. "Elara of the Eldenmore Cartographic Order," one of them said. "Found 3 miles inside the eastern boundary." He didn't look at the sentinel. He had been looking at her since she walked through the door. She looked back. His eyes were dark. The kind of dark that doesn't have a clean color name. And he was doing exactly what she was doing. Reading. Taking in her clothing, her boots, the map case strap across her chest. The fact that she wasn't shaking. She watched him notice that last part. Most people, she imagined, shook. "You crossed my boundary," he said. Low and even, not loud. He clearly hadn't needed to be loud in a long time either. "Yes," she said. "Do you know what the boundary means?" he asked. She reached into the map case, slowly, 2 fingers, showing him exactly what she was doing. She drew out the regional map, the one she had spent 3 years building, the one her order had spent 60. crossed the hall, and held it out to him. He took it, unfolded it, looked at it for a long time. She watched his eyes move across the mountain passes, the stream courses, the elevation marks, all of it in the finest detail her order had produced for this region. And in the center, right where his territory sat, nothing. A blank space, careful borders drawn around it, as if the emptiness itself needed to be contained. "My order has mapped this entire region," she said. "Every surveyor before me stopped at your boundary. That gap has been there 60 years. She held his gaze. "Gaps are a kind of lie. They say the territory doesn't exist." "And mine does," he said. He wasn't looking at the map anymore. "Yes," she said, "it does." He folded the map, held it back out to her. She took it. Then he said, "You understand that the law of this boundary is not a request. It is a treaty. It has held for 300 years. He let that land. 11 people have crossed this boundary before you, for 11 different reasons." His eyes didn't move from hers. None of those reasons were enough. The fire shifted in the grate. "Anyone who crosses does not leave." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. She woke up before the light came. For a moment, she didn't move. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the stronghold around her. The distant sound of wind off the mountain, the settle of old stone, the specific silence of a place that has been standing for centuries and has learned to be quiet about it. Then she remembered where she was. She sat up. The room was still there. Fireplace, burned down to embers now, but still warm. Desk, window, blankets that were actually enough for the altitude. She had noticed all of this the night before and filed it away without letting herself feel it, because noticing that a prison was comfortable was not the same as knowing you were going to leave it. She got up, crossed to the window. Outside, the territory was just beginning to separate itself from the dark. The tree line going from black to gray. The snow catching what little light the sky was giving. The mountain peaks were still invisible. She could hear the wind working at them somewhere above the cloud line. She pressed 2 fingertips to the glass. Cold, real. She was 3 miles inside the boundary. She had no way out that didn't go through him. And somewhere in this stronghold, the man who had enforced his law 11 times was deciding whether she would be the 12th. She turned away from the window. She went to the desk, sat down, and opened the map case. If today was the last day she had, she was going to spend it working. She drew for 2 hours before she heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the heavy tread of sentinels. One set of steps, unhurried, coming up alone. She recognized the weight of it, the particular way he moved, which she had already catalogued without meaning to on the walk across the great hall the night before. She set down her pen, kept her hands on the desk where they could be seen. The knock came. One knock, clean, not loud. She hadn't expected him to knock. "Come in," she said. He filled the doorway the same way he had filled the great hall, not by being loud or aggressive, but by being completely present. He was carrying a tray. Food, a pot of something hot, 2 cups. He looked at her. Then he looked at the desk, at the 2 hours of work laid out across it, the instruments lined up beside the inkwell, the detailed rendering of the route she had memorized on the walk-in. He set the tray on the corner of the desk. He looked at the map again, at the lines she had pulled from memory in the dark, the stream crossing, the tree line, the elevation shift at the half-mile mark. "You drew this from memory," he said. "I draw what I remember," she said. "I remember everything I walk." He looked at her then, Not the assessing look from the night before. Something slightly different. "Eat," he said. He moved to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the territory coming into the morning light. She watched him for a moment. The set of his shoulders, the stillness of him. And then she poured herself something hot and picked up her pen. The room was quiet. Not uncomfortably, just quiet. After a while, he turned from the window. "How long have you been mapping this region?" 3 years on this survey, she said. 60 in the order. He looked at her. 60 years. How old are you? She kept her eyes on the map. Elves age differently than you do. Among my kind, 63 is not old. She paused. Not usually. The last 2 words came out before she decided to say them. He went still. She set down her pen. There was no clean way to say this. There never had been. She had practiced it. With her order's healers, with the 2 colleagues she had told, with herself in the dark on the long walk to his boundary. It never came out clean. It just came out. My order's elders lose their physical sight, she said. It happens gradually. A transition, they call it. An elf cartographer with fading sight. She looked at her hands on the desk. That is what I am. Mine has started. The room was very quiet. I can still see, she said. Clearly, most of the time, but the edges, in poor light, at distance, they're going soft. She picked up the pen, turned it in her fingers. The healers say 1 to 3 years before it completes. Possibly less. He hadn't moved, which is why I crossed your boundary when I did, she said. Not next season. Not when I had more time to plan. Now, while I can still do it properly. She looked up at him. I needed to map this territory while I could still see it. He stood at the window and looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the mountain peaks were starting to come through the cloud. The light was getting stronger. She could see the boundary forest from here, the dark line of it to the east, the trees she had walked through yesterday with her compass and her measuring chain. After, he said. His voice was careful. When the transition completes, what do your order's elders say about what comes after? She had answered this question before. She knew the answer. She had said it out loud enough times that it came out steady. They say the inner perception that replaces physical sight is extraordinary, she said. That you learn to read the world differently, through resonance, through the way spaces feel rather than how they look. She paused. They say it is not a loss. He waited, because he had heard the same thing she had heard, the part she hadn't said yet. But I am a cartographer, she said quietly. I make maps that other people can read. Whatever the inner perception gives me, it will not give me that. She looked at the regional map, at the gap in the center, the blank space, still there, still waiting. That is why I'm here. That is why I crossed your boundary. She looked back at him. I have 1 survey left in me. This is it. He picked up his cup, crossed back to the window. Then you'd better keep working, he said. He didn't leave. He stood at the window with his cup and looked out at the territory, and she picked up her pen. Outside, the light kept coming in. She drew for an hour before she realized she had stopped listening for his footsteps on the stairs. She didn't know when that had happened. He came back every morning, not always with conversation. Some days he set the tray down, looked at whatever she was working on, and left without a word. She didn't push. She had learned, in the first 3 days, that he moved at his own pace, and that pushing would cost her more than waiting. So she waited. She worked. She built the map piece by piece from what she had already walked, filling in the edges, the approaches, the tree-line details she had memorized on the way in. The gap in the center stayed blank. She couldn't fill what she hadn't seen. But it was getting smaller. On the 5th day, he stayed. He didn't sit at the desk. There was only the one chair, and she was in it. He crossed to the window and sat on the sill, one leg up, and looked at what she was doing. She let him look. She had been watched while she worked before. It came with the job. She kept her eyes on the map and her hand steady. "The boundary markers on the western edge," she said without looking up. "They're older than the eastern ones. Different stonework. Cruder, but deeper set." She measured a line and marked it. "Someone else built them." A pause. "My father," he said. She looked up. He was looking out of the window. Not at her, at the territory, at something in the middle distance she couldn't identify. "The western boundary was his," he said. "When I took the territory, I extended it east, built the eastern markers myself." 300 years ago?" she said. "Yes." She looked back at the map, gave him a moment. "The eastern markers are sunk deeper, more deliberate." "I was angry when I built them," he said. The words came out flat, not a confession, just a fact. The way her words about her sight had been a fact. She recognized the register. It was how people spoke about things they had already finished grieving. She didn't ask why. She went back to measuring the distance between the northern peaks. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, just as she had decided he was done, he said, "My father used to say the mountains chose us before we chose them." She looked up again. He was still looking out the window. The morning light was coming in at a low angle, catching the side of his face, and for the first time she could see something in it that hadn't been there in the great hall. Not softness, exactly. Something older than softness. "He was right," she said. He looked at her then. That look, direct, reading, the same look he had given her across the great hall on the first night. Except it had changed slightly. She couldn't have said how. Just that it had. She held it for one beat. Then she looked back at the map. "Your father understood this territory before he claimed it," she said. "The boundaries aren't arbitrary. They follow the natural lines of the land. The ridges, the drainage, the places where the mountain closes in and creates a natural enclosure." She paused. Someone who didn't know this land couldn't have drawn these boundaries. He read it first. "He walked every mile of it before he laid a single marker," he said. "Took him 3 years. That's how it should be done," she said. Something shifted in the room. He looked at the desk, at the map spread across it, the weeks of careful work, the territory emerging line by line from the blank page. Then he looked at the gap in the center, the blank space, the 60-year absence sitting in the middle of everything she had built. "Show me," he said. She hesitated for just a moment. Then she reached into the map case and drew out the regional map, the full one, the one she had shown him on the first night, and laid it flat on the desk and turned it toward him. He crossed from the windowsill, stood beside the desk and looked at it. She watched his face. The blank space sat in the center of the map, the way a missing word sits in the middle of a sentence. Everything around it precise and detailed and complete, and then the gap. Careful borders drawn around nothing. 60 years of cartographers stopping at the same line and turning back. He looked at it for a long time. 60 years, he said. 60 years, she said. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. The particular warmth of the pack, which ran hotter than elves, hotter than humans. She had read about it. She had not expected it to be so constant. She kept her eyes on the map. "What will you put there?" he said. "When it's filled." She looked at the blank space. "The truth," she said, "whatever the territory actually is." He straightened, stepped back from the desk. She felt the warmth go with him. Then he said, "I'll take you out tomorrow, the Northern Pass. You can see the full shape of the territory from the top, how it sits in the landscape, what it borders." He moved toward the door. "Bring your instruments." She looked up. He was already at the door. "You're going to take me outside the stronghold," she said. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame, not quite looking back. "You have 23 days. The Northern Pass alone will take most of one of them. Don't waste the morning." The door closed. She reached for the blank sheets and began preparing for the morning. He was waiting in the courtyard before she got there. Already dressed for the mountain. Heavier coat than the night before. Boots built for serious snow. He looked at her kit when she came through the door. The map case, the measuring chain coiled over one shoulder, the compass in her outer pocket where she could reach it without stopping. He didn't say anything, just turned and walked. She followed. They left the tree line behind after the first hour. Above it, the snow was deep and the wind had direction. Not gusting, but committed, coming down off the northern peaks in a long, steady push that wanted to take everything with it. She had been in worse. She put her head down and matched his pace and didn't complain. He set a route through the upper snowfield that avoided the worst of the exposed sections. She could see the easier line, the one that offered less resistance. And he didn't take it. He took the faster one, the harder one. He glanced back once, early, to check she was keeping up. She was. He didn't glance back again. She liked that. They didn't speak much on the ascent. The mountain required attention, route finding, footing, the wind making every step a small negotiation. She stopped 3 times to take measurements, and each time he stopped with her. No restlessness, no shifting weight or checking the sky. He just waited. She filed that away. At the top of the pass, the wind hit them properly. It came in from the northwest. Hard and flat, and cold enough to make breathing deliberate. She got her bearings, pulled out the compass, and started on the panorama sketch. Her hand moved fast, pulling the most important lines before the temperature could make her fingers unreliable. Ridge bearing east. Valley floor to the south. The long approach they had taken through the lower forest, visible now as a dark line threading up through the white. The wind shoved at her from the left. She corrected. Kept drawing. It shoved again. Harder this time, the kind of gust that comes in sideways without warning. She took a step to compensate, and her boot found ice under the snow. His hand caught her arm. Not a grab, a catch. Fingers closing around her forearm, steady and immediate, the way you catch something before it hits the ground. She found her footing. He held on for exactly 1 more second, making sure she had it, and then let go. She looked at him. He was already looking back at the valley. "Ice shelf under the north-facing sections," he said. "It doesn't show." "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "Didn't make anything of it." She turned back to the sketch. Her arm was still warm where his hand had been. She kept drawing. When the wind came in again, a long, sustained push this time, the kind that didn't let up. He moved without being asked. Stepped to her left side and slightly ahead, putting his body between her and the worst of it. Not close enough to crowd her work. Just close enough that she could feel the heat of him through her coat. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on the page and her hand steady, and she was suddenly, acutely aware of exactly how large he was. Not as a threat, not the way she had been aware of it on the first night. Something else. Something she did not have a clean name for. She kept drawing. Her lines came out clean. She said nothing. He said nothing. She worked for 20 minutes in the shelter he made, and when the wind eased, he stepped back to his original position and looked out at the peaks as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just stood close enough to feel her breathe for 20 minutes and chosen, without a word, to stay. On the descent, she asked him questions. The names the pack used for the peaks, whether the southern valley flooded in thaw, how old the lower forest was. He answered in the same way he did everything, briefly at first, then with more detail, as if each answer she received without misusing made the next one slightly easier to give. The lower forest closed over them again, and the wind dropped. The silence between them was different from the silence on the way up. Less like two wary creatures monitoring each other's movements. More like two people who had spent a day working in the same direction. He reached the trees first, held the lower branch back without breaking stride. Held it long enough for her to pass through without ducking. Small, automatic. They walked on. At the tree line, where the path widened again and the stronghold became visible below through the bare upper branches, he stopped. She stopped beside him. He was looking at the territory. "You mapped the northern approach today," he said. "Yes," she said. "The western boundary tomorrow, if the weather holds," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "There is a place," he said, "that is not on any approach, not on any route a surveyor would find by following the logical lines of the territory." He paused. "It is the center of this land, not geographically, but in the way that matters." She looked at him. His eyes were still on the territory below. "No one outside the pack has ever seen it," he said. "No map has ever shown it." Another pause, longer this time. "I haven't decided whether to take you there." The words sat in the cold air between them. He turned and walked down toward the stronghold. She stood at the tree line for a moment longer. The center of this land. Not geographically, but in the way that matters. No one outside the pack has ever seen it. She had been mapping for 60 years. She had mapped places people had died to protect. Places that had been hidden for centuries. Places that existed in no record and would exist in none until she put them there. She had never been told there was somewhere she might not get to see. She wasn't sure what to do with that. Then she followed. 3 days after the northern pass, he took a detour. She noticed it at the fork in the lower forest path. The western boundary was left, and he went right without explanation. She followed. She had learned, in nearly 2 weeks inside his territory, that he did not do things without reason. The reasons just didn't always come with words attached. The forest here was older. The trees were bigger, darker. The canopy closing overhead so the snow only came through in patches. Her boots were quiet on the frozen ground. His were quieter. He stopped at the edge of a clearing she hadn't seen before. She came up beside him and looked. It was small, maybe 30 feet across, perfectly circular in the way clearings only are when something has kept them that way deliberately. In the center, one tree, enormous, ancient, its bark almost black with age, its branches spread wide enough to cover the whole space. And around its base, a circle of stones. Not a ritual arrangement, not decorative, just placed. One by someone who had come back to this spot enough times to know exactly where each one should go. She stood very still. She was a cartographer. She read places for a living. She knew what a tended space looked like. The difference between somewhere that had been visited and somewhere that had been kept. This had been kept for a long time. She didn't ask. She waited. He stepped into the clearing, crossed to the tree, stood with his back to her, looking at the circle of stones. "My mate is buried here," he said. She didn't move from the edge of the clearing. "I'm sorry," she said. 304 years ago, he said. He crouched down, adjusted one of the stones. Just slightly, the way you straighten something out of habit rather than necessity. There was an incursion. A human hunting party crossed into the territory. It happened sometimes in those years. The boundaries between their settlements and ours weren't yet fixed. Most of the time it was ignorance, not aggression. He stood back up. His hands were at his sides. "She went out to meet them," he said. "To talk. She believed that most things could be resolved if you were willing to stand in front of them and speak plainly." Elara looked at the circle of stones. "Could they?" she said quietly. "She was right more often than she was wrong," he said. A pause. "Not that time." The clearing was very quiet. The old tree held the space the way old things do. Not by force, just by having been there long enough that everything around it had learned to be still. "Her name was Nara," he said. "It means snow." "It's a beautiful name," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She was impatient," he said. "Argued about everything she cared about. Never once lost an argument she'd decided to win." Something shifted in his voice. Warmed. "She used to say that people who didn't push back weren't paying attention." Elara went very still. She was looking at the circle of stones, but she was listening to every word. "She couldn't leave things incomplete," he said. "Unfinished maps, unanswered questions, problems that had solutions no one had bothered to find yet. They drove her to distraction. She would have walked every mile of this territory herself just to understand it properly." He paused. "She would have crossed your boundary." Elara looked at him. He was still facing the tree. "She would have walked right through the eastern markers," he said, "with her compass and her questions and her absolute certainty that the gap needed filling. And she would have stood in my great hall and told me the world should be mapped completely." A long pause. "The same words you used. The same words." She looked at the old tree. At the 300 years of seasons it had stood over that circle. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "She liked people who couldn't leave things alone." Elara said nothing. She had meant to say something. She had a response ready. She always had a response ready. It was the thing her order's tutors had noted first about her. The thing her colleagues relied on. The thing that had carried her through 60 years of difficult rooms and difficult men, and one great hall where she had stood between two sentinels and not shaken. She had nothing. Chapter 2.
He had just described a dead woman and made her feel like she was being seen by someone who had been looking for a very long time. She looked away first. She looked at the circle of stones and she breathed and she pulled herself back. "That is both a compliment," she said, "and an accurate description of my most inconvenient quality." He looked at her for a moment. She wondered if he had seen it. She was fairly certain he had. Then, from him, something she hadn't heard before. A sound that was almost a laugh, quickly contained, but there. He turned from the tree, looked at her across the clearing. "Elara," he said. She looked at him. "My name," he said, "not the title, the one my mother gave me." He held her gaze. No one outside the pack uses it. Avara, she said. I know your name, he said. You know the name I gave your sentinels, she said. I wanted to say it to you properly. He looked at her for a long moment. The clearing was very quiet around them. He didn't look away. Neither did she. Then he turned and walked back toward the path. She stood in the clearing for one moment longer, long enough to look at the circle of stones one last time, at the ancient tree standing over them, at the space that one person had tended for 300 years without telling anyone it was there. Until today. She turned and followed him out. They walked back through the old forest in a silence that had changed, and neither of them said a word about how. She started going out before breakfast. The tray was outside her door 2 mornings in a row. Food going cold. She picked it up both times, ate at the desk, kept working. On the 3rd morning, the tray wasn't there. She stood in the doorway and looked at the empty landing. Then she went downstairs, found food in the kitchen, brought it up herself, and kept working. 3 days gone, 14 left. She was on her way back from the eastern ridge when she lost an hour. She had been working at the desk, lamp positioned correctly, full afternoon light still coming through the window, conditions as good as they got this time of year. She was rendering the detail of the southern marshland from the measurements she had taken 2 days before. Good measurements. She had checked them twice in the field. She reached for the ink vial. Her hand found empty air. She looked down. The vial was 4 inches to the left of where she had reached. She picked it up, opened it, dipped the pen. She looked at the line she had just drawn. It was wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. She had been reading her own numbers wrong, transposing distances, building a rendering that looked right and wasn't. She set the pen down. She looked at the work. 1 hour, maybe more. She couldn't tell exactly where the error had started, which meant she couldn't trust any of it. She would have to take the measurements again. Go back to the southern marsh in whatever days she had left and walk it again and check everything from the beginning. She sat very still. Outside the window, the light was going. The lamp was still positioned correctly. Her eyes were not. She reached up and turned the lamp down. Then she sat in the near dark with the wrong map in front of her. The door opened. She hadn't heard him on the stairs. She didn't turn around. The lamp, he said. I know, she said. He came into the room. She heard him cross to the fireplace, the sound of wood being added, the fire building back up. Then his footsteps to the desk. He reached past her and turned the lamp back up to full and adjusted the angle so the light fell directly on the work surface. Then he was still. She could feel him looking at the map, at the hour of wrong work sitting on the desk in front of her. The southern marsh measurements, she said. I'll have to go back. I'll take you tomorrow, he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at the map, not at her. His face was even, no pity, no alarm, the same steadiness he brought to everything. But there was something underneath it, something careful. You've been going out alone, he said. I have enough days left, she said. If I'm efficient. That's not what I said, he said. She looked back at the desk. Elara, she said. Don't, he said quietly. I'm not. You've been going out before I get here, he said. Coming back after dark. Working until you can't see and then working past it. He paused. I've been finding your trays outside the door. She said nothing.
3 mornings, he said. She picked up the wrong map, held it, set it back down. It's moving faster, she said. The transition, faster than I told you, faster than the healer said. She kept her voice even. I have days, not weeks. The margin I thought I had, it's smaller than I said. The fire settled in the grate. How many days? He said. Enough to finish, she said. If I don't lose any more hours to errors, I should have caught. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled the chair from the corner, the one that had been there since the first morning, the one he had never once sat in, and set it beside the desk and sat down. She looked at him. "Show me the measurements," he said. "The ones you think are wrong. Read them to me, and I'll tell you what I hear." She stared at him. "2 sets of ears," he said. "You read the numbers out loud. I listen for the transpositions. You'll catch more than you would alone." She picked up the field notebook. She started reading. He listened. They worked until the lamp burned low and the fire needed building again. And outside the window, the territory disappeared into full dark, and the first snow of the new week came down soft and certain against the glass. She caught 3 more errors she hadn't seen. He didn't say anything about that. Neither did she. They worked until the lamp burned out entirely, and she finally set the notebook down. Outside the window, the territory was completely dark. No tree line, no peaks, nothing. Just the snow coming down and the sound of it against the glass. He stood to rebuild the fire. She watched him for a moment, the way he moved through the dark without hesitation, the way the room had already made space for him in it. And she thought, 11 days. 11 days, and she would have to leave. She hadn't decided yet what she was going to do with that. The messenger arrived on a Tuesday. She knew something had changed before anyone told her. She saw it in the sentinels. The way they moved through the courtyard that morning. Faster, more deliberate. The particular tension of people who have received information and are waiting for orders. She came in from the eastern ridge at midday and found him in the great hall. He was standing at the long table with a document open in front of him. He looked up when she walked in. Something in his face. Not alarm, he didn't do alarm, but a tightening. The look of a man who has been waiting for something and is now deciding how to say it. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He turned the document toward her. She read it. It was a formal invocation, old language, treaty language, the kind that had specific legal weight in pact law, from the Eastern King. His seal at the bottom, heavy and deliberate. The substance of it was simple, and it was devastating. Word had reached the Eastern territories that someone was inside Elara's boundary and alive. The treaty required enforcement. If the law was not upheld by the solstice, 7 days away, the Eastern King would bring a formal challenge, not just to the boundary, to Elara's standing as king. She read it twice, then she set it down. "How long has he known?" she said. "Long enough to have written this 3 days ago and sent it by fast writer," he said. "Who told him?" she said. "It doesn't matter who told him," he said. She looked at the document, at the seal, at the specific, careful language of a man who had been waiting for exactly this opening and had moved the moment it appeared. "It matters to me," she said quietly, "because it means this has been known outside your territory for at least a week, which means other kings know, which means the solstice deadline isn't just a calendar date anymore. It's a public test." He said nothing. She looked up at him. "What are you going to do?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him, the stillness of him, the careful way he held himself when he was working something through. She had learned to read that stillness over 3 weeks, had learned that it usually meant he was choosing words, not avoiding them. But this was longer than usual, and she felt it. The thing she had been trying not to feel since the first morning he had knocked on the tower door, and she had started, without meaning to trust him. "Elara," she said. "I'm not going to enforce it," he said. "You hesitated," she said. "I was choosing how to say it. he said. You hesitated? She said again. Steady, factual. He looked at her. You are sitting, he said carefully, in the chair of a woman who crossed my boundary knowing what the law said, who has been inside my territory for 3 weeks, who has heard me say in this hall that no one who crosses leaves. He paused. And you are asking me to tell you, 7 days before the solstice, with a formal challenge on the table, what I am going to do. Yes, she said. That is exactly what I'm asking. I told you, he said. I'm not going to enforce it. You told me after I pushed, she said. There's a difference. The hall was quiet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the table and sat down across from her. Not at the head of it, not in the position of a king receiving a subject. Across from her. Equal distance. The challenge will come regardless, he said. Whether I enforce the law or not, Calder has been waiting for a reason to push at this boundary for 50 years. I have given him one. He looked at the document. What I do now determines the ground I stand on when he arrives. And what ground is that? She said. A rewritten law, he said. The boundary stands, the treaty stands, but the enforcement clause changes. Any cartographer who crosses is received for a season. Hosted, not imprisoned. The mapping of the territory becomes a formal arrangement, not a violation. He paused. It gives Calder nothing to stand on legally. The territory is still mine, the boundary is still real, and you are here under revised terms rather than as a prisoner awaiting judgment. She looked at him. That is a very clean solution, she said. Yes, he said. It also means you rewrote a 300-year-old law in 3 weeks because a cartographer crossed your boundary and you decided not to kill her. She said. Yes, he said. That is what it means. And you think Calder won't see that? She said. Calder will see exactly that, he said. And he will come to the solstice and make his challenge, and I will stand in front of him and every other king who comes, and I will hold the revised law, and it will cost me something. He held her gaze. I have decided the cost is acceptable. She sat with that. What if it isn't? She said. Acceptable. What if Calder comes with more than a legal challenge? What if he comes with... She stopped. The document on the table had gone blurry. Not dramatically. Just the edges of the seal, the bottom lines of text, soft. The flat gray light coming through the hall windows not enough suddenly for her eyes to do what she was asking them to do. She blinked, looked away from the document, looked at the wall, the fireplace, the distance, trying to find something her eyes could hold. The fireplace was clear, close enough. She looked back at the table. The document was still soft at the edges. She felt him go still across from her. She had not been going to let him see this. She had been managing it. The light, the distance, the careful choices about when and where she worked. She had been managing it for 3 weeks, and she had almost made it. Elara, he said. I'm fine, she said. You're not looking at the document, he said. I can see the document, she said. You're looking at the fireplace, he said quietly, because it's close enough. Cuh. She set her hands flat on the table. Outside the hall windows, the gray light sat low and flat on the snow. The particular dead light of a winter afternoon that gave her nothing to work with. She had known this morning when she went out that the light was going to be difficult today. She had gone anyway. She looked at him. He was looking back at her. That direct reading look, the one she had first seen across this hall 3 weeks ago when she was standing between 2 sentinels, not knowing if she was going to live through the night. Except it was different now. It wasn't the look of a man assessing a stranger. It was the look of a man who had been paying attention. "Both things at once," she said. "That's what today is." "Yes," he said. "The Eastern King, and—" She stopped, started again. "I have less time than I told you. I've been managing it. I thought I could finish before you had to." She stopped again. She was not a woman who ran out of words. She looked at the blurred edges of the document on the table. "I didn't want you to see it," she said. "Until the map was done. Until I had finished what I came here to do, and it didn't matter anymore whether you saw it or not." He was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he said. "Days," she said. "Not weeks. The center of the territory. I need the center, and I need enough light to render it properly, and I have—" She calculated. 4 days of good light left, maybe 5 if the weather holds. "Then we go tomorrow," he said. "The center. I'll take you." She looked at him. "You said you hadn't decided," she said. "I've decided," he said. She held his gaze. "I told you I won't enforce the law," he said. "I know you don't fully believe me yet. I know the hesitation costs something and I can't take it back." He paused. "So I am going to show you instead. Tomorrow. The place no map has ever shown. You will map it. And when Calder comes at the solstice, I will stand in front of him with a formally mapped territory sealed under oath and a rewritten law, and I will hold both." Another pause. "That is what I am going to do." She looked at him across the table. The document between them still soft at the edges, the fire clear and close. "I'll be ready before the light," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he crossed the distance between them. Not fast, not slow, the way he did everything, and she had time to see it coming and chose not to step back. His hand came up to her face, just his fingertips against her jaw. The same warmth she had been noticing since he first stood beside her at the desk, since the windbreak on the northern pass, since every small moment she had filed away and told herself meant nothing. Except now, it wasn't incidental. Now, it was deliberate. She closed the last inch herself. The kiss was quiet. No urgency, no desperation. He pulled back slowly. She let him. They stood in the lamplight with the document between them on the table and the fire burning low. He nodded once. He picked up the document, folded it, put it away. Chapter 3. The valley was not on any approach. She understood that the moment they descended into it, the way the mountain shoulders closed around it on all sides, the way the path they had taken wound through a gap so narrow and unremarkable that she had noted it as a drainage channel on her earlier surveys and moved on. You would never find this place by logic. You had to be shown. He had stopped at the top of the descent and let her go first. She took 3 steps down, and then she stopped. Long and narrow, the valley floor may be 200 feet below where she stood. A frozen stream running its full length, catching the low winter light and throwing it back silver. Old trees along the edges, the same ancient dark-barked trees as in the clearing where Nara was buried. The same quality of having been there long enough to have opinions about the place. And in the center, younger growth, the kind that came back after something opened the canopy. Birch and young ash, pale and clean against the snow. The whole valley oriented perfectly to catch the sun at midday. Even now, in the dead of winter, the floor held a warmth the surrounding slopes didn't. She could see it in the snow. Softer here, slightly melted at the edges of the stream bank, the kind of give that meant the ground underneath hadn't frozen as deep as everywhere else. She stood and looked at it for a long time. This valley, had been kept, held in someone's mind for 300 years as the thing worth protecting most. She looked at it until she had it. Then she reached for her instruments. She worked for 2 hours. The light was good, better than it had been for days. The winter sun finding the valley floor the way he had said it would. The shadows sitting where she needed them to sit for the elevation marks to be accurate. She measured the length and width by pacing, verified the bearing of the ridge against her compass, used the sound technique on the frozen stream to get the depth. Her hands were steady. Her eyes held. She drew the valley the way she had drawn everything in this territory. Not just its shape, but its character. The way the old trees leaned slightly inward along the eastern edge. The younger growth in the center and what it suggested about the history of the place. The stream's exact curve, which was not the curve of a stream that had chosen its own path, but of one that had been running the same line for so long, it had become the land's preference. She drew the way the light sat on the valley floor at midday. She didn't have to. It wasn't cartographically required. But she drew it anyway. A note in the margin, the kind her order's best mapmakers had always included. The ones that told you not just where a place was, but what it was like to be there. She drew until she had everything. Then she lowered her pen and looked at what she had made. The valley existed on the page now. Whatever the transition took from her, this would remain. She sat with that for a moment. Then she became aware that he had moved. He had been at the valley's edge for the 2 hours she had worked, standing at the top of the descent, looking out, leaving her to it the way he always left her to it. But now, he had come down. He was standing 10 feet away, looking not at the valley, but at the map in her hands, at what she had made of his most private place. She held it out to him. He took it, looked at it for a long time. She watched his face and saw something in it she hadn't seen before, something quieter than everything that had come before it. Something that looked like recognition. He handed it back. She put it in the map case and sealed it. When she looked up, he was watching her. Not the valley. Her. Something in his face had settled. Quieter than the clearing. Quieter than the hall. Something that looked like a decision already made. "I want to show you this valley in spring," he said. "When the stream runs, and the birch comes back, and the whole floor goes green. I want you to see what this place becomes when the cold lets go of it." He paused. "I want to show you what I have been keeping this for." She was very still. "You built a boundary out of grief," she said quietly. "I know that. I'm not asking you to unmake it." "I know you're not," he said. "I'm unmaking it anyway." He looked at the valley, at the stream, the old trees, the winter light on the floor. "I built a wall because I lost something, and I didn't know what else to do with the size of the loss. I told myself it was law. It was also simpler, to be a king and not a person, to have the treaty and not have anything the treaty could threaten." She said nothing. "You walked through the eastern markers," he said, "with your map case and your measuring chain and your absolute certainty that the gap needed filling. And you stood in my hall and didn't flinch." He paused. "And in 300 years, no one had ever done that. Not like that. Not looking at me like I was something worth reading rather than something worth fearing." The valley was very quiet around them, the stream frozen, the old trees still, the winter light moving slowly across the floor. "Stay," he said, just the word, nothing attached to it. "Not because the solstice requires it," he said, "not because the map needs finishing. The map is finished. You finished it just now, because this valley is better in spring, and you should see it. because you are the first person in 300 years who has made this territory feel larger rather than smaller. He looked at her. Because I am tired of being a wall, and I don't know how to stop being one except to ask you not to leave. She looked at him for a long moment. The completed map was in the case on her back. The valley was around them. The winter light was still holding, just the sun beginning its low arc toward the western ridge. An hour of good light left at most. She had one question. If I leave, she said carefully, to deliver the map, to take it to my order myself, the way I said I would, the way it should be done. And then I come back. He waited. Would you let me back through the boundary? She said. Knowing I had crossed it twice, knowing what that has cost you once already. He looked at her. The question sat in the cold air between them, clean and honest, and asking for the one thing no declaration could give her. Not a promise of feeling, a promise of the door. He opened his mouth to answer, and the valley held its breath around them. They came at midday, 4 kings, Calder first, which told her everything about how he saw the hierarchy of this meeting, and 3 others behind him, each with 2 sentinels, filling the great hall with more bodies than she had seen in it since the night she was arrested. Elara had told her to come, not to stand beside him, not to be presented or explained, just be in the hall, at the back, let them see you standing freely. She stood at the back of the hall, near the left wall, her map case over her shoulder, and she watched them come in. Calder was tall, nearly Alara's height, broader through the chest, the kind of man who had learned early that size was a language and had been speaking it ever since. He walked into the hall, and his eyes went straight to her. She had been looked at like that before. The first night, in this hall, between 2 sentinels, except that look had been assessment. This one had already reached its conclusion. Then he looked at Elara, and he smiled. 300 years, Calder said. His voice carried easily. He'd pitched it to the room, not to Elara. 300 years and 1 law. I have to say, I didn't expect to be here. No, Elara said. I don't imagine you did. Calder's smile didn't move. The treaty is clear, he said. Anyone who crosses the boundary, state the challenge, Elara said. Calder stopped. She felt it before she understood it. The specific silence of a room where the ground has just shifted and nobody saw him move. She had walked into enough difficult halls to know what that silence meant. He had been ready for this. He had been ready before Calder arrived. I'm sorry, Calder said. The Interpact Treaty requires a formal challenge to be stated, Elara said. Out loud, in full, in front of witnesses. He looked at Calder with the particular patience of a man who has 3 centuries on everyone in the room. So state it. Calder looked at him for a moment. Then he looked around the hall, at the other 3 kings, at the sentinels, at the walls and the fireplace, and the stone floor worn smooth by centuries of use. At Elara, standing at the back with her map case, not shaking. He looked back at Elara. You have harbored a boundary crosser, Calder said. In violation of the Interpact Treaty, the law requires enforcement. I am here to ensure it. Good, Elara said. Now we can proceed. He reached into his coat and drew out a document. Not the one Calder had sent, a different one. Thicker, older paper, the kind that came from a stronghold's formal archive. She went very still. He had done this before she asked him to. Before the valley, before the hall. Before she had shown him the edges going soft in the flat gray light. He had already been moving. He unfolded it on the long table and turned it so the room could see. She watched Calder's eyes find the seals at the bottom. Calder's allied kings, his own. She understood then exactly what it had cost to arrange that. The Interpact Treaty, Elara said, grants each king full authority over the law within his own boundary, including the right to revise that law, provided the revision is formally recorded, witnessed, and does not diminish the sovereignty of any other territory. He looked at Calder. The revision I have made does none of those things. Calder's eyes moved to the document. You've rewritten the enforcement clause, he said. I have extended it, Elara said. The boundary stands. The territory is sovereign. Any cartographer who crosses is received for a season under formal arrangement. Their work conducted under my authority, their maps sealed under oath as territory of record. He paused. The revision was witnessed 3 days ago by 2 of your own allied kings. Their seals are at the bottom. Silence. Calder looked at the document. At the seals. His jaw moved slightly, the specific movement of a man recalculating. You planned this? Calder said. I wrote a law in grief 30 years after I should have, Elara said. I have spent 300 years enforcing it. I am allowed to spend 3 weeks rewriting it. This is about her, Calder said. His voice had changed, the room-filling projection gone, something harder underneath. He looked at Elara. You rewrote 3 centuries of law for an elf with a map case. The hall was very quiet. Elara stood at the back wall and did not move and did not look away. Elara turned to look at her too. And then he turned back to Calder and said, in the same even voice he used for everything, The Cartographic Order of Eldenmore has formally mapped this territory under oath. The map is sealed and recorded. Every boundary, every pass, every stream course, all of it now exists in the permanent record as my sovereign land. He looked at Calder steadily. Which means any challenge to my territory, now or in the future, has to contend with a formally documented record of exactly what is mine and exactly where it ends. He paused. You came here to find me weakened. You have found me better documented than any king in this range. Calder stood very still. The other 3 kings were looking at the document on the table, at the seals, at each other. Elara watched Calder's face, watched him go through the calculation, watched him find the edges of it, watched him reach the conclusion she had reached the moment Elara unfolded that document. There was no ground left. The law was revised, witnessed, and sealed. The territory was mapped and recorded. The challenge had nowhere to land. This isn't finished, Calder said. He took one step toward Elara. Just one. Deliberate. The kind of step that isn't about closing distance. It's about making a point. About reminding everyone in the hall what the law said should have happened to her the moment she crossed the boundary. Every head in the room turned. Elara moved. Not fast. Not aggressive. He simply stepped into the line between them. And the room changed. Not because of anything he said, because of the specific, absolute quality of his stillness when he stopped moving. The kind of stillness that had nothing to prove, because it never had. He looked at Calder. No, he said. One word, quiet as everything he said. Calder stopped. From the back wall, Elara watched it happen. Watched a king who had walked into this hall ready to take something decide in the space of 1 second that he would not. Not because the law had changed. Not because of the document on the table. Because of the man standing between him and her. The hall was absolutely silent. The 3 other kings had gone very still. The sentinels had not moved. Nobody moved. Calder looked at Elara for a long moment. Then he looked at the room. At the kings, the sentinels, the sealed document on the table, the formally mapped territory that now existed in the permanent record and could not be unmapped. He had nothing left to stand on, and everyone in the hall could see it. "No," Elara said again. "It isn't finished. You will push at the eastern boundary in spring, and I will hold it, and we will have this conversation again with different paperwork. That is how this works." He didn't move from where he was standing. "But today is finished. You have stated your challenge, and I have answered it under treaty law in front of witnesses." A pause. "You're welcome to stay for the solstice meal." Calder looked at him for one more long moment. Then he turned and walked out. His sentinels followed. The door closed. The three remaining kings looked at each other. One of them, older, gray-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who has watched many rooms change in a single moment, looked at Elara and gave a small nod. Nothing elaborate, just acknowledgement. Elara nodded back. Then the hall began to move again. Voices, the scrape of chairs, men who had witnessed something already discussing something else. She stayed at the back wall. He was at the table, speaking quietly to the gray-haired king, the document in his hands. His face was even. The same face he brought to everything. She knew what it had cost to keep it that way. She had seen what was underneath. He had paid it in public, without asking her to watch, without making it a thing she owed him. He just did it. He looked up, across the hall, through the bodies and the noise and the firelight. He found her immediately, the way he always found her in a room, the way his eyes went to her before they went anywhere else. And he looked at her for just a moment. She held his gaze. Then she picked up her map case and walked out. She went to the tower room, sat at the desk, opened the regional map, the full one, the completed one, every line in place, the gap gone, and looked at it for a long time. He had answered her question the only way she would have believed it. The door was open. She folded the map carefully, put it in the case, sealed it. Then she picked up her pen and began writing 2 letters, one to her order, one to him. She had been gone 4 days. He knew because he had counted them, not obsessively, not with marks on a wall, but in the way you count things you are trying not to count. The morning trays he had brought to an empty tower room before he remembered. The evening light on the eastern tree line that he kept noting as good working light before remembering there was no one left to work in it. The tower room was clean. She had left it that way. Instruments gone, map case gone. The desk cleared except for an envelope with his name on it in her precise cartographer's hand. He had read the letter once, put it in his coat, had not taken it out again because he did not need to. He knew what it said. "The map is with my order. I told them the gap is filled. I told them I found something worth coming back for. I will be back before the month turns." Before the month turns. 4 days. He was not counting. He went about his work. The pack needed managing. The solstice had brought business beyond Calder's challenge, the usual end-of-year accounting of territories and grazing rights, and the 3 ongoing disputes that never fully resolved but required annual attention. He sat in the great hall and heard petitions and made decisions and signed documents and did all the things a king did when he was being a king and not a person. He was aware, the whole time, of the eastern tree line, not watching it, just aware of it. The boundary was out there, 3 miles through the forest, and beyond it, the world that she had gone back into to do the thing she had said she would do. He had not doubted she would come back. He told himself he had not doubted it. On the 2nd day, he went to the clearing in the lower forest. Stood for a while with the old tree, and the circle of stones, and the particular silence of that place. He did not say anything. He rarely did. But he stood there long enough for the forest to know he had been, and then he walked back. On the third day, he found himself at the desk in the tower room. He did not know why he had gone up there. The room was clean and empty, and there was no reason to be in it. He stood at the window and looked out at the view. She had looked at every morning. The territory going white under the winter sky, the boundary forest to the east, the peaks above the cloud line. He stood there for a long time. Then he went back downstairs and did his work. On the fourth day, just before midday, he was in the great hall. Not at the table, at the window. The one that looked east toward the tree line, the same window he had been standing at 3 weeks ago when she had crossed the boundary and he had gone very still and said one word to his captain. He was not waiting. He was standing at the window because the light was good and the view was clear and it was a reasonable place to stand. The tree line was still. Snow on the ground, thin winter sun, the dark edge of the old forest sitting exactly where it had always sat. Nothing moving. He looked at it. Then something moved, at the eastern edge, where the boundary trees grew darker and closer together, where the markers he had built in anger 300 years ago still sat deep in the frozen ground. A figure came out of the tree line, tall, silver pale hair catching the thin sun, a map case over one shoulder, a measuring chain coiled over the other, walking at the pace of someone who had covered distance and had more to cover and was not stopping until she arrived. He stood very still. She crossed the open ground between the tree line and the stronghold without slowing. He watched her come. The particular way she moved, which he had memorized without meaning to over 3 weeks, the efficiency of it, the way she covered ground like someone who had spent 60 years learning that nothing worth reaching came without the walk. She had come back. He had not doubted it. He turned from the window. He was standing in the center of the great hall when she walked through the door. Not at the window, not at the table. In the center. The same place he had stood on the first night when the sentinels had brought her in and she had crossed the floor toward him without flinching. She stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was travel-worn. 4 days on the road in winter, the cold in her coat, her boots, the faint wind burn across her cheekbones. The map case was over her shoulder, worn leather, many times repaired, the strap she had shown him across her body on the first night. She had crossed his boundary twice now. The first time she hadn't known if she would live. This time she had known. The hall was very quiet, the fire in the grate, the stone floor worn smooth by centuries, the window to the east where he had just been standing, the tree line visible through it, the boundary somewhere in the forest beyond. She reached into the map case, slowly, with 2 fingers, showing him her hands. She drew out a single folded sheet and crossed the hall and held it out to him. He took it. He unfolded it. It was the regional map, the complete one. Every line in place, every pass and peak and frozen stream rendered in the finest detail he had ever seen. And in the center, where the blank space had been for 60 years, the territory, his territory, the northern pass, the western boundary, the frozen lake, the high meadows, the valley, all of it, rendered in ink and color, the pale gold of the valley floor in winter sun, the dark green of the old-growth tree line, the silver of the lake, the soft gray of the high rock. She had made it beautiful. He folded the map carefully. He held it back out to her. She took it, her eyes on his. those pale silver eyes that had been reading him since the first night, that had read the hall, the firelight, the distance between him and his sentinels, and had found, somewhere in the middle of all that reading, something worth crossing a death boundary twice to come back to. "The valley," he said, "in spring." She looked at him, and she said, "Show me." The end.